Deeply unpopular, sparked armed resistance from various mujahideen groups.
So the country's deeply divided. You've got the communist government in Kabul facing off against these rebel groups. What was the Soviet Union's reaction to all of this? Were they just going to sit back and watch their communist allies struggle?
Not a chance. In December 1979, they invaded Afghanistan, fearing the collapse of the PDPA government. A major turning point, not just for Afghanistan, but for the whole Cold War. This marked the beginning of the Soviet-Afghan War.
The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, it's one of those historical events that sends chills down your spine. What was this war like?
Brutal, 9-year conflict. The Soviet army had superior weaponry, but they faced fierce resistance from the Mujahideen, who were supported by the U.S., Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, others.
It's hard to even imagine the human cost of this conflict.
Millions of Afghans displaced. The country flooded with weapons and so much destruction.
So how did it end? Did the Soviets realize they were in over their heads?
They did. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was changing. Under Gorbachev, they were having their own problems, economic issues, wanted change at home.
Makes sense. They had their own issues to deal with.
Yeah, they realized that Afghanistan was just unsustainable. And in 1989, they withdrew their forces.
So finally, Afghanistan was free of foreign troops. But I imagine the country wasn't exactly in great shape after nearly a decade of war.
You're right, the Soviet withdrawal left a huge power vacuum, and Afghanistan plunged into this chaotic civil war. Different Mujahideen factions all vying for control.
So, from one conflict to another.
Sadly, yeah. The country was in ruins, economy had collapsed. Millions of Afghans were still living as refugees in neighboring countries. It was during this chaos that a new force emerged, one that would come to define Afghanistan for years to come. The Taliban.
The Taliban, a name that, well, evokes a lot of fear and controversy. Before the 1990s, most people had never even heard of them. Where did they come from?
The Taliban, it means students in Pashto. They emerged from these Islamic religious schools called madrasas in Pakistan. Many of these schools were funded by Saudi Arabia. They presented themselves as this force for order and stability, promised to end the chaos and corruption.
So they appealed to that deep desire for peace and security that people felt after years of war.
Exactly. A lot of Afghans, they were just exhausted, and they saw the Taliban as a potential solution. And the Taliban were really effective militarily, well-organized, disciplined, and ruthless. They quickly gained control of large parts of the country.
So in a way, they were a product of the very chaos they claimed to oppose.
That's a good point. It's often how these things work, isn't it?
But once they were in power, what was their vision for Afghanistan? What kind of society did they try to create?
They imposed a very strict interpretation of Islamic law, Sharia law, on Afghan society. Music, television, most forms of entertainment banned. Women were forced to wear the burqa, that full body covering.